Good evening and welcome. Live tonight on the latest from 7 News, charting a new course. Comprehensive coverage of the AUKUS subs deal, our biggest defence project. Bye-bye Bali, the new rule being considered that's turning off tourists. Every sector sheds, our share market down from a banking collapse in California. And the concussion compo lawsuit that could cost the AFL $1 billion.
The latest from 7 News with Angela Cox.
Thank you for joining us. We are a long way off seeing champagne smashed against the side of a sub. Tonight, though, a timeline for a 3-decade journey to achieving our biggest defence project ever. A plan to buy and build nuclear-powered, not nuclear-armed submarines. A military muscle-up to strengthen our standing in an unstable region with our AUKUS partners. We'll have analysis from political editor Mark Riley, insights from defence expert Professor Peter Dean, and reaction from China. But first, if everything goes to plan, and that's a big if, here's how it should play out.
Early next decade, we'll buy at least 3 Virginia-class submarines from the United States. There's the option of purchasing an extra 2 if needed. The sale hinges on approval from Congress. The first of those boats due to arrive here in 2033 as our ageing diesel Collins-class fleet is retired.
Strengthening Australia's national security and stability in our region.
In the meantime, we'll join the UK in building the next generation AUKUS-class vessel, a British design fitted with American technology. The United Kingdom delivers the first to its Navy towards the back half of the 2030s.
Because not just are we building these submarines together, they will also be truly interoperable.
We'll build 8 of our own boats at a new shipyard in South Australia, one rolling out every 3 years from 2042. More than 8,000 workers are needed in that state alone, a total of 20,000 direct jobs nationwide.
To invest in our people, in our skills, in our infrastructure, to be part of the biggest undertaking this state has ever seen.
The cost of it all, up to $368 billion over the next 30 years. A spend the government knows is significant, but says is worth it.
This is an investment in our nation's security. It is an investment in our nation's economy, and it is an investment that we cannot afford not to make.
This year, our military personnel and civilian experts go to US and Royal Navy bases to start training. We'll see a stronger Allied presence in our waters, more frequent American visits to ports here. Brits doing the same 3 years later. From 2027, rotational deployments from American and British submarines.
Now to Mark Riley in Los Angeles. Mark, is the spend justified in your opinion?
Well, Ange, the government's response to that is that the bigger cost would be not doing it and leaving Australia exposed with an outdated submarine fleet and antiquated weapons systems in a region covered in oceans and with predator submarines out there from other nations, not naming China, but we know who they're talking about. I mean, it's a matter of priorities really for the government, and particularly for Treasurer Jim Chalmers as he now looks at how he's going to pay for this longer term. There's no doubt that defence spending is going to have to increase from the target of 2% of GDP in the short term. Mr Chalmers will find that money by redirecting the $6 billion from the axed French submarine program and ordering Defence to find another $3 billion in savings over 4 years. This is a 30-year plan, and those figures are eye-watering. Somewhere between $268 billion and $368 billion over those 30 years. The government says, at least it's being honest about it, every one of these defence programs, the big ones, blows out horribly. We know that. And they're saying they're being upfront. So $100 billion difference. Where does that money come from? Here's an intriguing prospect. The Stage 3 tax cuts, which the government has been under pressure since it came to power to axe, would save the budget $254 billion over 10 years. So something like $750 billion over the 30 years, plenty to pay for the subs program and more to go back to the budget to be spent on other projects. So perhaps we'll see the government at the next election pose a question to voters, put it to them. where do you want the money spent? Do you want it to go on nuclear-powered submarines being built over the next 30 years to ensure Australia's security in the region? Or would you like to see it to go to rich people in tax cuts they probably don't need? I think we know the answer to that. Will the government be brave enough to put the question? We'll see, Ange.
Next to our China correspondent Richard Kimber. Richard, Beijing isn't thrilled as predicted. What's been the response?
That's right, China is warning Australia and the AUKUS nations that they risk setting off an arms race with this deal. It says they're also setting back efforts on nuclear non-proliferation. It's accusing the three nations of a Cold War mentality and undermining efforts for regional peace and stability. This comes just one day after President Xi Jinping has been unanimously voted into power for a third term as president, and he's announced that he wants to ramp up defence spending on China's own military and security ambitions. He says he wants to turn the Chinese army into what he calls a great wall of steel that effectively safeguards national security. So lots of bombastic rhetoric coming out of Beijing at the moment, but no clear indication of how there can be a diplomatic resolution or some form of agreement between Beijing and Australia and, of course, Washington and the UK on their very divergent security ambitions.
Indeed. OK, Richard Kimber reporting for us from Hong Kong. Thank you. Tomorrow, the Premier of South Australia is flying to the United Kingdom to visit a nuclear submarine shipyard. Peter Malinauskas has told our team at 7 News Adelaide he is striking while the iron is hot.
Well, we don't have a moment to lose. We know that this is the most complex and substantial undertaking that has ever occurred in the history of our nation, and we've got to start developing the workforce that is going to deliver on this program and this enterprise. The pipeline of work is there now, the security and the continuity of the work is there now, so we can now plan around it. Our people can start getting trained for the exercise, particularly that next generation.
And later this hour, I'll ask a security expert if it's too little, too late to fend off China. Let's turn to our other top stories now. First, the lawsuit against the AFL players suing for life-altering concussions. We saw a steep sell-off yet again on our share market off the back of the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank in the United States. The ASX 200 closed deep in the red, down 1.4%. Every sector in the firing line, tech, energy and banks, suffering the worst of it. Network Finance Editor Gemma Acton is here. Good evening to you, Gem. Why is our market feeling it more than Wall Street?
Well, Ange, Wall Street hasn't escaped entirely intact. It's been trending lower since March 6. But you're right, we have had it worse since then. The ASX 200 has dropped by more than 4%. The collapse of Silicon Valley Bank has triggered fears about banks in general, particularly smaller regional US banks. And their share prices have had a really rough few days. First Republic shares plunged by more than 60% yesterday. Shares in another small lender, Western Alliance, almost halved. But these banks are really insignificant in terms of the overall US share market, worth far less than 10 billion Australian dollars each. If you compare that to the Commonwealth Bank, for instance, whose market value is $161 billion. In fact, 4 out of the 6 largest listed companies in Australia are banks. So when turmoil hits the sector, it does make a sizable dent in our share market's overall performance. Now, Wall Street was also shielded from more losses thanks to a sharp scaling back of interest rate expectations in the US. Many economists had been forecasting the Fed would hike rates by 0.5% later this month. Now, since the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, those forecasts have been dialed right back, giving US share markets a slight reprieve from all these troubles. Ange.
OK, Gemma Acton, thank you. To Ned Baum now, joining us live in Brisbane, where a coroner has released new findings into the murder of a senior constable. Ned, what was revealed at the inquest?
Well, Ange, the coroner basically today said that the murder of Senior Constable Brett Fort in 2017 had all the hallmarkings of an ambush. He was on the manhunt of wanted fugitive Ricky Madison at the time. Now, the inquiry found that the Gatton police had responded to, I suppose, information they had about gunfire, automatic gunfire on a road near the property where it happened. This was prior to the shooting, but nothing actually eventuated from that. They also heard that a police-stationed camera outside the property was actually discovered by Madison, only, I suppose, adding fuel to the fire of his angst against police. Now, Fort and his partner Kath Nielsen were part of this manhunt, but they've basically been said today that they were just sitting ducks for the ambush. The coroner also criticised the treatment of family following the incident. They say they have been bullied and gaslit.
Instead of revealing the truth, the motive of their investigation appears to have been to have Kath and I portrayed as vindictive or crazy.
To know that we've been believed and supported, that felt really good.
Now, 4 recommendations have come from the inquiry. Perhaps the most important is the call for all frontline officers to have a greater access to information and intelligence. Now, but to Fort's widow, Susie, she says she wants all of those recommendations to be taken on board and hopes that if they aren't done, well, she fears rather that something, another tragic incident may happen.
Okay, thanks so much, Ned. Let's go live now to Amy Clements at Westmead Hospital in Sydney, where a baby girl is fighting for life after a car crash that killed her mum and her brother. Amy, we've heard tonight from the family. What have they said?
Well, Andrew, family have said that baby Ivy is still on life support, but they are by her bedside here at the Children's Hospital, praying that she makes it through. Her mother, 34-year-old Kat Silla, and her 2-year-old brother Kai died instantly yesterday when their car collided with a cement truck on the Hume Highway in Menangle Park in Sydney's southwest. Somehow, baby Ivy did survive and she was pulled from the wreckage of the car. Her father and, of course, other relatives are distraught tonight, but they have told 7 News that they would like to express their gratitude to everyone, strangers they don't know and first responders and everybody that was on the scene yesterday who tried to help. They've also added thank you once again and please keep baby Ivy in your prayers. They're also incredibly thankful to all of the staff, doctors, nurses here at the Children's Hospital who are working around the clock to try and save baby Ivy. But Ange, exactly what caused this tragic accident is still under investigation.
Just heartbreaking. Okay, thanks so much, Amy. To mothers on a mission tonight, a second breastfeeding woman kicked out of court in Melbourne accused of being a distraction. Peter Brunel was asked to leave while nursing her baby, the judge saying the unsettled child was unfair to the jury. The former lawyer joined protesters outside raising awareness for women's rights after a mum was ordered to go last week for the same reason. It's officially case closed tonight for AFL superfan Jeffrey Joffa Korf after prosecutors decided not to appeal his sentence for child sex assault. The former Collingwood cheer squad leader was given a suspended term after pleading guilty to abusing a teenage boy in 2004. His victim called for it to be overturned, but we've been told such a move has been ruled out. 2 young sisters missing for more than 3 days have been found in Adelaide tonight. 6-year-old Indiana and 7-year-old Daniela were taken from their home, their father and stepmother pleading for their return. The girls were believed to be with their biological mother, who was spotted this morning without them. We can confirm the girls have been returned safe and well. A handful of us have been misbehaving on motorbikes in Bali and authorities there have had enough. So much so, tonight they're threatening to ban visitors from riding altogether. Joining me is our resident travel expert, James Wilkinson. James, lots of outrage on this. What has brought this ban on?
Sounds like a lot of chaos in the past couple of months in Bali, where we're seeing motorcycle accidents, mainly with foreigners, not Aussies, actually, a Russian and a Ukrainian. Someone crashed into a local, kicked them off their bike. A few incidences going on. We're seeing it on social media. And I think the governor's had enough. The governor tends to talk a lot about what goes on in Bali with tourists. There was obviously the STEX ban they were trying to put in place, which was for locals, not tourists. And they've got billboards up telling visitors what they should be wearing in Bali. So the governor's kind of had a bit of enough. But if you think about Bali, there's a lot of those small streets on the island, a lot of small roads. So if you're not used to riding through that kind of traffic, which a lot of people aren't, they're obviously getting into trouble. So it sounds like it's a handful of people, but the governor's saying we've had enough. But what the government's not doing over there, they're not building any more roads. They're building a lot more hotels and tourism destinations. So people are having to get around, and it's a lot of traffic around. So a lot more riders and those who aren't used to that kind of mess are getting in trouble.
Yeah, and you you look at it online, because this has caused a lot of outrage online, and a lot of people pointing out, well, actually the locals ride around with no helmets on, and they're pretty crazy as well with the road rules. So I guess, you know, it's not just the tourists. Do you think these hardline rules, like you say, the sex ban that we all knew about, like, is that going to spook people from wanting to go over and visit Bali, do you think?
I don't think so. I think this one's a bit different. I think there are people on social media saying, I won't go to Bali if I can't ride a motorbike, and that sounds a bit silly. I think a lot of people who go there, and there's a lot of Europeans back there now as well, a lot of Aussies, it's quite an expensive destination to get to at the moment because it's in such high demand. I don't think it's going to change much. I think if they start changing things like liquor laws, I think that would change things a lot. If you look at some parts of the world where you can't drink when you go to a destination, there are markets that just don't want to do that. So I think little things like this, I don't think would be a huge issue, but I think it's more for those who go there regularly. So just say you're in WA or Queensland or NT and you're a FIFO worker. A lot of people like to go on holiday in Bali or live in Bali. I think those that are regulars, it will be an issue. Those going for 4 or 5 days, I can't see it being a major problem. But yeah, those that are there all the time, I think will get annoyed by it.
So just say you really like riding your scooters, just say it is enough, or you just don't like the government telling you what you can and can't do while you're on holidays. Tell us some of the other good beach destinations, and maybe some that are a bit cheaper to get to.
Some great spots at the moment. Hawaii at the moment for next month, right through Easter school holidays, is absolutely affordable. Big thing with Hawaii at the moment is the Japanese haven't come back. So the Japanese market's only 10% of what it was in 2019. So some of the hotel specials, all up and down Waikiki in particular, are phenomenal. Airfares getting to and from, I saw Fiji Airways the other day was $850 from Sydney back to Honolulu and back. And that was right in the middle of school holidays. Jetstar about $1,000 return. Some really great packages on offer at the moment. Otherwise, something like urban, like Singapore. The Singapore Airlines have been doing some great specials in the market. And I think looking at places like that, you could go to Sentosa, you can go shopping. So think of something a bit different and closer to home. Far North Queensland, again, they don't have the inbound tourists at the moment. So lots of specials in Palm Cove, Port Douglas, and even in Cairns itself. Lots of new hotels as well. Lots of renovated hotels. So local, I think Far North Queensland's great, but Hawaii for me is the place to be at the moment.
Well, as a Far North Queensland girl, I'd say stay local, but Hawaii sounds pretty good too. Thanks so much, James.
Awesome.
Still to come this Tuesday, we'll have that AFL concussion compensation story for you, plus insights from a security expert on the AUKUS submarines deal. That's next, live on the latest from 7 News. More now on tonight's top story, those new details on our nation's biggest ever defence project. The Prime Minister confirming a plan to buy and then build our own nuclear-powered submarines with our AUKUS partners. Let's bring in Professor Peter Dean from the United States Study Centre. Thank you for joining us, Professor. Firstly, what advantage do these subs give us?
They give us an enormous advantage. We have a conventionally classed submarine at the moment, the Collins class. It's a diesel-electric submarine, so it's restricted in its range by the amount of fuel it can carry. And to be stealthy and silent, which submarines need to be, it relies on its batteries. And of course, to charge those batteries, it often has to come to the surface to what we call snort. That's raising a snorkel, just sucking oxygen to run the diesel engines to recharge the battery. But a nuclear-powered submarine is a quantum leap in technology ahead. And given the concerning strategic circumstances we're facing now and into the future, it's a really important advent for the Australian military in order that we have a regionally superior submarine, not just now through Collins, but well into the future, into the 2030s, 2040s and 2050s. The Chinese now have the largest navy in the world. The Chinese have built 12 nuclear-powered submarines in the last 15 years, many of them nuclear armed as well. And by the time we receive our first AUKUS boat in 2042, well, the Chinese will be operating in excess of 70 submarines in our region. So this is a prudent and responsible move by the Australian government and by the UK and the US government as well.
There are already fears that its military rivals or surpasses America's. According to the Wall Street Journal, the People's Liberation Army now has hypersonic missiles that evade most defences, technology the US is still developing. Its attack drones can swarm to paralyse communications networks. This deal is for the next 30 years, but what about the next 5 years? Are we exposed until we start getting these subs?
Well, I think one of the things to keep in balance here is one of the reasons we're going for a nuclear-powered submarine is to maintain a regional military capability edge. Public sources will tell us that the United States submarine technology is a generation in advance of anybody else in China. And so by acquiring that, what we get is an asymmetric edge against China or any other potential adversary, where we have, while a smaller number, much more higher quality vessels and much more capable vessels. Now, this is AUKUS. When you delve into AUKUS in a bit more detail, this is actually AUKUS Pillar 1. There is actually AUKUS Pillar 2 that exists as well, and that's advanced technologies, including hypersonics that you mentioned. So not only are we doing nuclear-powered submarines, we're also investing with the United States and the United Kingdom in cybersecurity, in artificial intelligence, in quantum computing, and as you said, hypersonics.
We've heard tonight that Beijing hasn't responded favourably to this announcement. There is some concern that we could be antagonising Beijing. Do you think we are waving a red flag to the bull here?
Absolutely not. As I mentioned earlier, China has undertaken the largest military modernisation and expansion since the Second World War, and one of the largest in human history. They've done that without consulting us. They've done that without consulting any other country in the region. And if anyone's causing an arms race in the region, it is China. It is not us. It's not the United States. It's not Japan or any other country.
Okay, Professor Peter Dean, thanks so much for your time. Next to that story we had some technical troubles with earlier. A class action lawsuit against the AFL tonight. Players suing for life-altering concussions. Let's go to Rochelle Brown in Melbourne. Rochelle, what could this cost the league?
And this is a huge class action involving more than 60 former players, and it could see the AFL forced to cough up more than $1 billion in compensation if indeed it is successful. The legal battle kicked off today in the Supreme Court here in Melbourne. It's all being led by Geelong Premiership player Max Rook. He's the lead plaintiff in this case and claims that he was received more than 30 knocks to the head during his career. 2 of those left him unconscious. Now, the case involves both former players and family members of deceased players, some of which who are claiming more than $1 million individually for pain and suffering, economic loss and, of course, medical expenses. Now, lawyers do hope that this can be resolved before it's dragged any further through the courts, but it is early days. They say that if it does proceed to trial, they will be calling on neurologists to give expert evidence. Now, this all comes just as the AFL announced its new concussion strategy today. That will include 4 full-time staff members employed specifically to tackle the concussion issue in the AFL. Ange?
Okay, thanks so much, Rochelle. Your Wednesday weather outlook is ahead, plus a refugee and her pet dog start their new lives together after quite the journey to freedom. That is next on the latest from 7 News. You're taking a live look at Adelaide, where it's been a clear night for those enjoying the Fringe Festival. A bit of cloud there expected tomorrow. The forecast for the rest of the capital cities, partly cloudy for Brisbane, Sydney, Canberra, Hobart and Adelaide, overcast in Melbourne. A hot one for Perth, sunny with a top of 30 degrees, showers and a possible thunderstorm in Darwin. And in other parts of the country, a scorcher for Alice Springs, reaching 39 degrees, a wet one for Rockhampton, sunny and hot in Broken Hill, and a partly cloudy day ahead for Launceston. Our final frame is an unbreakable bond on a journey to freedom. An Afghan refugee reunited with her pet dog after more than a year apart. Freshta Siddiqui first rescued Lucky from the streets of Kabul when she saw children pelting him with rocks. The Anatolian shepherd soon repaid her kindness with fierce loyalty, barking to protect her from the Taliban when they raided their home. Targeted for advocating women's rights, Freshta fled Afghanistan, but not before putting Lucky on a plane chartered by an animal welfare group to Vancouver. His journey was significantly easier and quicker than hers, but now finally, half a world away, they've been reunited in their new home. All the effort worth it, says Freshta, tonight's final frame. Before we go, a friendly reminder, you can stay across the latest on our social media channels. It's where you'll find each night's top stories plus special behind-the-scenes content. We're on all the big platforms. Just search for any of our handles. You can see there and give us a follow if you'd like. Thank you for your company this Tuesday from the team. That is the latest. I'm Angela Cox. Good night.
Stream 7 News anywhere, anytime, live and on demand on 7 Plus. And with 7news.com.au, you'll know the news now.